Okay, let's see a show of hands. Who has ever heard of Marlow Briggs? Yeah, that's what I thought. I've eyed this game for a while, and in the most recent Steam sale, I bought it for, I think it was like $1 or $2. I wasn't expecting much. It was cheap, it was clearly an indie title, and it was an action game. I figured it would be a questionably decent way to kill a few hours. But was it any good? We'll get to that. I probably don't need to explain who you get to play as, but I'll spell it out just in case your brain might be rebooting or running on ME. You play as Marlow Briggs, visiting his girlfriend Eva on an archaeological dig. Bad things happen, of course, and the clearly evil villain of the game, Hang Long, orders one of his flunkies to stab Marlow with an ancient weapon, killing him. A few hours later, he rises with the power of an ancient being that is contained inside of a Mayan death mask. With his girl Eva gone, Marlow sets out to find her and maybe take a little revenge in the process. At its core, Marlow Briggs is an action game that doesn't veer too far from being something like a God of War clone. Well, maybe with a bit of Uncharted sprinkled in. You have a primary weapon in the form of a spear that had killed him. You can use light and heavy attacks to defeat the various enemies that you'll run into that are trying to, well, kill you again. Maybe permanently this time? There are also a couple of spells that you can use, each using large chunks of your magic meter. There are also upgrades of sorts to your weapons that you can find that alter the shape and actual attacks that Marlow uses. These upgrades are found at specific points of the game. As you are killing enemies, you'll also earn experience points, as to be expected in a game like this from modern times. There is a rudimentary upgrade system available, in that every weapon form and magic spell has 3 incremental upgrades. Spells get more damaging, and weapons have more attack combos. In addition, every time you put points into a weapon, your maximum health increases, and likewise, increasing the potency of your spells increases your magic pool. It's not very in-depth, but it does work. One thing I will admit is that the controls of Marlow Briggs feel a bit funky at times. Third-person action games like this, I prefer a controller, just how I work. Yet this game isn't controller compatible. It's a bit odd. In addition, the keyboard controls are a bit unique to say the least. You are directed to use I and P to attack. What? I mean, with how the game works, this is easy enough to do, but it just feels so weird. Thankfully, you can use the mouse as expected, but there are some QuickTime events that show I and P, so you do need to get prepared for that and not forget which is which. Another thing to note is that the mouse is only really used for attacking, if you care to use it at all. There are no camera controls. Camera angles are fixed, adjusting on their own. This works well enough as there aren't many reasons to go exploring for extra XP and the few collectible items that can be located. There's really not much else to say about the gameplay. You go from area to area, defeating Long's thugs and various insect wildlife. It's a bit confusing why in the opening scene you see the mercenaries wielding AKs, but when you encounter them they are only carrying machetes, other than the rare ones that utilize rocket launchers. Maybe a financing problem? The insects can be annoying to fight. Most aren't too bad and just swarm you. Area attacks take them down quickly enough. But the larger centipede and scorpion creatures? Now that's another story. They just absorb the hits you keep throwing their way. Eventually they will fall, but you'll get used to evading their attacks. Once they're almost dead, they slump over, stunned, and at this point you can control the creatures. Their use is very limited, but it does save you from taking any additional damage, which is especially nice if you are low in health and close to death. You'll also be able to control some bosses after they are defeated, as the game tends to always give you a swarm of enemies afterwards just to have some fun. Speaking of having some fun, this game is surprisingly fun from start to finish. It never really takes itself too seriously, with a few different gameplay types thrown in, like some areas where you slide down cliff sides, optional XP challenges, and even 2 full-on shoot-'em-up sections where you are piloting a chopper. The game also feels like a full-on action movie. The story makes it feel like Marlow Briggs is a new superhero, and this is his origin story. The action also could have been directed by Michael Bay, as there are often explosions every second. Over the top? Absolutely, but still awesome to play out. With all the action, it is kind of odd that most of the scenes that you run across are done in a sort of stop-motion style. The camera keeps rotating around while various forms of carnage occur. It's pretty interesting to watch, even if it does feel kind of out of place at times. Now, the game is fun, there's no denying that. It may not do anything extraordinary to separate itself from the other thousands of action games, but it's still enjoyable. But that's not to say there aren't any flaws. Magic, although cool looking, has very few uses. Sure, they can be great crowd clearing moves, but they are stupidly expensive to cast. If magic regenerated on its own, this wouldn't be a big deal, but it's only obtained in minuscule amounts when killing enemies, or it can be replenished in full by finding a blue mask. Secondly, there were a few glitches that I ran into. Most notably were two back-to-back in the same segment. I was climbing on a wall, and just disappeared into it. That's right, I became one with the wall. Couldn't proceed, so I had to reset the checkpoint, which wasn't that big of a deal since it was only a few seconds prior. The other problem I ran into was when I got past that segment, I got to the top, and the world sort of went missing. It was only temporary, as departing this area made the textures reappear, but it was worth mentioning. I guess the only other thing I should mention are the visuals. The game looks great, with a nice variety of mechanical factories and lush jungles. There's some good detail on the mercs and local wildlife. And finally, and it's one of the first things I've noticed when playing the game, Marlow Briggs is freaking jacked. His arms look like he would be a championship caliber boxer or something. I know I wouldn't want to mess with him. Marlow Briggs and the Mask of Death is a pretty good action game that won't break the bank. Great visuals, solid combat, unique presentation. If you're a fan of third-person games like this, there's no reason to not check it out. And with a 5-hour runtime, it won't take too long to finish either. Final score, 6 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.